Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 1955, an act relating to state government establishing a budget for the Department of Agriculture. The Senate has repassed said bill in accordance with the recommendations of the report of the Conference Committee. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate. The report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File number 1955, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 2 out of the 3 members on the part of the Senate and 2 of the 3 members on the part of the House. Vang moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 1955 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion that I encourage members to adopt the report, and in the next discussion, I can talk about the bill.
Any discussion on the motion? On the motion, Representative Anderson from Pope County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would move that the House refuse to adopt the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1955 and that bill be returned to the Conference Committee. As we've heard before, as we wind up the session, that this Conference Committee didn't see a lot of the light of day either, like some of the other committees. We met once, I think last of the previous Monday, and then we're called back on Saturday to sign the report, to look at the report, and it was done. So some good things in the bill, but just concerned that there should have been more activity by the entire Conference Committee. So because of that, Madam Speaker, I would move that the bill be returned to the Conference Committee.
Seeing no discussion on the motion, all those in favor of the motion to refuse to adopt, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail. We are on adoption of the Conference Committee report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File number 1955 as amended by conference.
3rd reading as amended by conference. Discussion to the report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a good, well-rounded agriculture and broadband bill. The largest investment we make on the Ag bill is establishing a grain indemnity fund with one-time funding of $10 million. This will protect grain producers and keep them afloat should there be a grain elevator failure. We heard time and time again from farmers who have been financially devastated by elevator collapses. After years of discussion and continued hardship experienced by farm families year over year, this will finally provide meaningful protection to producers who sell grain in Minnesota. Broadly, this is important because when farmers sell grain to an elevator, they often don't collect payment right away. And in fact, they're extending credit to their elevator. We also make strong historic investments in emerging farmers. 99% of farmers are white, and as chair of the Agriculture Committee, I represent generations of farmers that have been left out. This bill will expand the Emerging Farmers Office to be able to service farmers with the greatest barriers towards land access, financial access, market access, and access to resources provided by the state. We also make continued investments. We know there have been long-time good programs of the state, such as Farm to School, Good Food Access, Urban Ag, and so on. When we talk about farming, we must also address being good stewards of the land. We look at how to protect pollinators and protect soil health. The state makes strong investments in the Soil Health Financial Assistance Program that will enable farmers to become better stewards of the land and invest in equipment and cover crops that will benefit the farmer economically and sustainably. Members, I can't say enough how many good things we have in this bill that are good for farmers, for our land, and for agriculture. There are also hot button issues we talked with the Senate and have reached agreement on. One is regarding the Board of Animal Health. They do a great job in protecting the state from animal diseases, especially since last year on high-path avian influenza. We also heard from other issues that needs further addressing, such as companion animal welfare and CWD, and we've reached an agreement to add a board member who needs to be a companion animal veterinarian. PFAS was also a hot button issue. These forever chemicals accumulate over time, and for our public health, we must continue to protect human health. Farmers utilize many of these chemicals, and this would allow MDA to work on pesticide safety and regulation under their authority given by the EPA. Mr. Speaker, these are the provisions within the bill, and I ask members for your support.
Is there any further discussion to the repassage of Senate File 1955? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not very often I get up and speak to the Ag bill, but I do have a couple of questions. If the chair would, with Representative Yang, would yield.
Representative Vang, will you yield to a question? She will yield, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Vang, I want to bring your attention to page 36, lines 10 through 14. I'll give you a second to find that. And this has to do with data sharing between agencies. The new language there, as you can see in the subtitle, they've added delegation and data sharing to approved agencies. And then it says the commissioner may enter into data sharing agreements with other state agencies to help assess the potential for unreasonable adverse effects to human health and the environment and the use of pesticides. So I'm wondering if you could share with me if there's somewhere in statute other than right here where it's laid out what data sets are being collected, and then how would that data be classified? They're sharing it back and forth. Just wonder if there's another reference in statute that you might know about since this is government-created data.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, this provision is, to look at, to encourage state agencies, this is regarding the PFAS language that we're talking about. In the Environment Bill, there's also some references to PFAS and how to regulate some of these products containing PFAS, and MPCA has some of that authority, and so MDA, the Department of Agriculture, has authority under pesticides, and so this is just to clarify and ensure that there's no duplication between the two agencies.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. There's similar language on page 42 as well, and it pertains to fertilizer, I believe. So we've got these applications of data sharing for pesticides and for fertilizers. And so what I'm assuming, since there's no reference here to Chapter 13, what I'm assuming is any of this data that's collected and shared is presumed to be public, because all data is presumed to be public unless it's classified otherwise. So would that be your understanding, if she would yield to that question, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker?
Representative Vang, will you yield to a question? She will yield, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Scott. I believe this data is just to encourage two agencies to make sure that registrants who have these types of products are able to work with one agency rather than with both agencies. And so I believe this is something that the agency will be best suited to answer this question.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Vang, you just brought up something that I hadn't even read into this. Would you yield to another question, please?
She will yield to another question, Representative Scott.
Thank you. So will this data that's being shared, will it contain names and addresses of farmers or others that are using, in this case, well, either pesticides or fertilizers that have some ingredient of PFAS in it?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott. I would just say that when this will be onerous on the company to already provide data that's already being provided to the agency currently. And so this is just to specify whether they have PFAS containing ingredients within the products. So we're not changing how the data is being collected.
Representative Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my understanding then is this is the manufacturer that's going to be reporting this information if their product contains PFAS. And then the agencies, the government agencies, will be able to share that amongst one another. So would it be your understanding that if I wanted to see some of that data from that manufacturer that's flowing back and forth between these agencies, if I wanted to see if they shared, the Department of Ag shared that information with the Department of Health, I would be able to have access to the data that was shared, and with whom, if she would yield to that question?
Representative Vang will yield. Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, I think I will defer this to the Chair of Environment Committee, Representative Hansen, who can best answer this question, as he has a much more extensive language on PFAS.
Representative Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm happy to ask the Chair of the Environment Committee to yield to that question, if he
You
would.
will yield. Representative Scott. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Scott. And I was a little late catching the flow here, but I want to kind of go a little bit into the authorities question on who does what in this. So the registration of a pesticide authority rests with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and that authority is delegated from US EPA, and US EPA registers the pesticide, and there's a registration number that goes with that. So looking at the approved agencies, the commissioner here is the Commissioner of Agriculture, and so what we've determined in the both general public and then also a scientific literature is that there are some pesticides that have PFAS in them, whether it's intentionally added as part of the active ingredient or whether it's an inert ingredient. So the authority on the registration of the pesticide rests with the Department of Agriculture. However, PFAS, how you deal with PFAS, whether it's a variety of the PFAS components, maybe with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and if you had an incident, let's say that I was exposed to a pesticide that had PFAS in it, and I may be having an acute response, we may need the Department of Health to look at that health information. So when you look at the commissioner may, by written agreements, delegate specific inspection, enforcement, and other regulatory duties of this chapter to approved agencies. And then what's being added of the commissioner may enter into data sharing agreements with other agencies to help assess the potential for unreasonable adverse effects on human health. The authority that the Commissioner of Agriculture has is, does the pesticide do what it's supposed to be doing? Is it affecting the pest? The Department of Health may have additional information that by sharing that information with the Department of Health, they're able to provide that information that the Commissioner of Agriculture may not have, or subsequently to the Pollution Control Agency that maybe have additional information on environmental impacts of PFAS. So I think that's the data sharing, how that would occur and why it occurs. If you have an additional question, maybe I can help with that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Chair Hansen. I do have a further clarifying question, because you did mention if the example you gave is if you were having an adverse effect to, you thought was maybe as a consequence of exposure to something, a fertilizer or a pesticide with PFAS, and the Department of Ag contacts the Department of Health, and the Department of Health, you've reported to them this incident that you think it's related. Is the Department of Ag then going to have your contact information? Is that kind of some of the data that's going to be going back and forth? Because there's no data classification here, and it seems like there's a lot of data sharing going on. If you would yield to that question.
Representative Hansen will yield to your question. Representative Scott, I recognize Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Scott. I think how that would be handled is under the data that the statute that's being proposed here that the Commissioner of Agriculture would enter into data sharing agreements with other state agencies. And I don't know if Chair Becker-Finn is on the floor, but those data sharing agreements, there are data sharing agreements that occur elsewhere. I would assume that they need to follow the same requirements for data protection.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. And Representative Hansen and Representative Fang, that's why I'm a little puzzled, because there's no reference to Chapter 13 here, but this is a new section of new lines in statute that's saying that we're going to allow for the sharing of data, and we don't know what data sets are going to be, if there's going to be any personal information. As the example that you gave, if you're having an adverse effect, we don't know if your personal information would then go to the Department of Ag. I'm just a little bit puzzled by the drafting of this, because I don't know what I don't know. And if Representative Hansen would yield to my perplexity here.
Representative Hansen will yield to your question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Scott. So I think the point to look at is the regulatory nexus on when the decision-making occurs. So the Commissioner of Agriculture has the decision whether or not to register that pesticide. And so the registration of the pesticide is with the manufacturer coming to the state of Minnesota, paying a fee, and the Commissioner of Agriculture determines whether they should register that pesticide. In order to make that decision, data may be shared with them, that data may be shared by other agencies, whether it's the Pollution Control Agency or the Health Department, I would use those two as an example, on specific inspection, enforcement, or other regulatory duties of the chapter. So the chapter is 18B, the pesticide control law. So using my example that I provided may not be the best example because that's more an acute response of what was Representative Hansen exposed to. But probably the better example is here the company is proposing to register the pesticide, and what is the data that they need to make the decision on, does it have an unreasonable adverse effect on health or the environment? And so I think where that comes in, when you have in existing law the specific inspection, enforcement, or other regulatory duties, may help in that decision making on whether or not to register that pesticide, which may contain PFAS. So you have pesticide X, the registrant says this contains PFAS, whether it was in the active ingredient or the inert ingredient. And so Commissioner of Agriculture has a data sharing agreement with PCA and says, with pesticide X, do you have any records of enforcement action on that particular thing? Do you have something that we can use to make that decision? So it's on the decision-making authority to decide whether or not that pesticide should be sold in the state of Minnesota. I don't know if that helps or not.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Chair Hansen. Yes, that's helpful. If anyone from the Department of Ag or Pollution Control Agency, any of these agencies are listening and they have further clarification, I would love to know more. It sounds like it's at the licensing, at the time that it's approved to be licensed or used in the state of Minnesota. I just want to make sure there's no personal information and that Minnesotans can get access to this information, assuming that it's public, because it's not classified otherwise. And also concerned that there wouldn't be any proprietary information that's being shared that, for these companies that are the manufacturers. So don't want to belabor this, but in the future, I hope that if we find out some answers to those questions that are troubling, that we could work on getting something placed there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker and members, I think we're doing committee work on the floor here, and I appreciate the line of questioning from Representative Scott. And it illustrates why we attempted to send this bill back to the committee. This is a fairly complex and difficult topic to understand, especially here on the floor when some of the acoustics are not the greatest. But this was an amendment that was added to the conference committee report with a timestamp of 12:15 on Saturday afternoon, and the committee started its meeting at 2 o'clock. So we had an hour and 45 minutes to study. I think it was a 7-page amendment that replaced some earlier PFAS language in the bill, and we're left here with some very serious questions about confidentiality and such. And again, it's just an example that these conference committees should do their work in conference committee and not here on the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Chair, Vang, will yield for a question.
Representative Vang will yield to a question. Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Vang, I had a constituent that's very much into this cottage food thing. I'm sure you're abundantly aware of who they are. We'll leave names out of it. However, the question I have for you, in this, on page, I believe it's 79, it allows for the shipping of pet treats, but not for all of the products that they make. Can you help me? And today in the Senate, it came up and it was discussed that it was more of a House provision, that it was limited to this. Can you help me understand why this is being limited, more so on the House side and the Senate side, why there is such a concern to not allow it to all?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Meckland, thank you for your question. The short answer is food safety concerns. Right now, cottage food producers, they don't have to go through inspection. They don't have to get licensed. And over the pandemic, they have grown to be 7,000 producers who are cottage food. And the reason why we decided to limit to pet treats is because it won't affect human health. Right now, I think there's still more work to be done on this issue, on this bill. And but for now, regarding food safety concerns, that's why we only limit to pet treats, since that cannot affect human health.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if Representative Vang will yield to another question?
She will yield for another question. Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So was this more of like an MDA concern because of the health and safety issues? Can you answer me that?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is also our concern, too.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If she'll continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Meckland.
So Representative Vang, when you said it's also our concern, does that mean it's both the MDA as well as the committee's concern?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Meckland, I think it is also our job to protect public health and safety of our constituents. And so I think this should be everybody's concern.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that, Chair Vang. I guess, you know, it's my understanding that no matter what they make, whether it's for a pet treat or human consumption, they're held to the same safety standard. That is what I was just been informed. I was actually on the phone all the way over here from the State Office building. And however, I will say that I understand putting your foot in the water, but if you hurt my little Fluffy, I'm going to be really, really upset as a guy who spent 4 hours in the emergency care vet in St. Cloud last Sunday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Glad to see this conference committee report make this bill a little bit better. At the same time, there's still plenty of concerning provisions inside of this bill. And I just want to take a moment and thank Chair Vang. She traveled across the state seeking input from many people and the people of Minnesota, the farmers across this state. You know, I'm concerned with a lot of the contents of this bill through the lens of the fact that it's off balance, it's off kilter to the whole of agriculture in our state. And that's seen in the where the dollars are spent, and huge increases to the Department of Agriculture, and frankly, huge increases to bureaucracy are found within this bill, members. And you know, even when we have a near $20 billion budget surplus, that doesn't mean we should go about growing government and bureaucracy that makes it more difficult for the Minnesota public to engage with its government and the department. And there's several different sections of this bill that are quite concerning. But I represent an exceedingly rural district filled with many family farms, filled with some emerging farmers in our state. But as I travel across my district and talk to farmers, you know, some in this body might be quite surprised by the amount of times that I hear from farmers saying, gosh, you know, we really need to stay out of people's bedrooms. But inside this bill and the emerging farmer program, it specifically directs the Department of Agriculture to make decisions based upon the decisions that people make inside their bedrooms. It's wrong. It shouldn't be in there. And members, we can help new generations of farmers go to work on the land, providing for food security, but none of it should be determined by what happens within an individual's bedroom. And that's what this bill does. Unnecessary language, and a bill that enhances bureaucracy, makes it more difficult for people who want to farm to work with the state agency, and adds to bureaucracy and costs to the taxpayers across the state. Further, this bill, members, gives authority to the commissioner, of whom is a good friend, and allows any future commissioner to raise fees on their own without legislative approval. This sort of policy shouldn't be pursued in this bill or other budget bills, but yet it's found within this bill right here. So these are several reasons why this body should reject this bill, send it back to conference. We can make it even better. Vote no.
Further discussion to Senate File 1955. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a good bill. We've spent many listening sessions hearing from farmers all across the state. Thank you, Representative Schultz, for hosting us in your district. I also want to thank staff and committee members for all their work on the making of this bill. And you know, I just want to make sure that we pass a good bill. Thank you so much for your support.
I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I thought I was on the list, and again, my apologies for speaking after the bill author. I'm going to rise and say I'm going to vote for the bill, and there are three main reasons I'm going to do that. The first is that we're additionally adding money to the Grain Indemnity Fund. On the House side, it was $5 million. Now it's up to $10 million. That's very important as we get this program jump-started for the farmers of Minnesota. I also appreciate the changes to the language in the Board of Animal Health. When it left here, it was 11 members. Now it's down to going to be 7, with one additional veterinarian named who is a specialist in the companion animals. That's a good feature. And the other part that I especially appreciate is the dropping of the language pertaining to treated seeds in this bill. Again, I'm proud to represent agriculture. Minnesota is 4th in the nation in the production of agricultural products. It's a $110 billion industry. 430,000 jobs resulted from agriculture in this state. It's a great industry. And when I go home and see families on the farm planting and combining and such, see a dairy barn or a hog barn or a turkey barn, it's just good to see that that's happening in Minnesota. So again, Mr. Speaker, I apologize for speaking out of turn, but I just wanted to mention I will be supporting this bill today.
Is there any further discussion of Senate File 1955? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 85 ayes and 44 nays, the bill is repassed, is amended by conference, and its title agreed to.